Hey, I wanted to go over the affidavit real quick. These two officers swore to this as being the truth, although I believe it was Gilbreth that was questioned on the stand, and he kept pointing to the other guy saying, I think he knew that information. But it comes down to Corey. She's the one that signs off on everything. Even if her signature's not on there, she's agreed. She's already read it. She knows what's in the document, and she's accepted it. Basically, all three of them are responsible for the document. So they lay out the experience of these investigators, I guess in a way so that the judge can just set aside the fact that they're not bringing out any information and just say, well, they've got, a lot of years of experience, so we can just ignore the fact that, they're full of hot air. And then the last paragraph on this says that, the information that they brought together basically just lays it out, how they gathered it. Scrolling down, the story begins. They say that Trayvon goes back into the neighborhood after leaving the 7-Eleven, but what they leave out is the fact that he's coming in through an unsecured yard, and that he actually goes too far to the south and then comes back up. So the way that he went into the yards and the houses that he went between, he went too far south. If he was cutting through, he could have easily cut through on the other side of that building. So the fact that he was that far south showed that it wasn't a real cut through. It would have been quicker for him just to go straight down to the gate and use the code. And the fact that he was in between the houses should be in the affidavit, because that's why George found that he looked kind of odd. He's standing between the houses. He's not really moving in any particular direction, and he looks suspicious the way he was acting. They just say that he was profiled by George. To me, that's a half-truth and a straight-out lie, because they're not telling the judge, and it wouldn't have taken any more words just to say the truth and say George was driving through the neighborhood and he saw Trayvon between the houses, up on the grass, out of the sidewalk, off the sidewalk. Not recognizing Trayvon, it was a natural occurrence for him immediately to think, I need to find out what's going on here. This house has been broken into before, and everybody knows that the criminal always returns to his crime. That's why he called the cops. If he really wanted to take the law into his own hands, as everybody says he did, and approach Trayvon and grab him, let me ask you why it is he didn't stop at that very moment and get out of his car and walk over and approach Trayvon right there. That's what we need to ask ourselves. And then again, the second time, when Trayvon walks up to his car over by the country club building where George had parked, if George wanted to, when Trayvon walked around the car and said, what's going on, why didn't he just, if he wanted to assault him right there and then, if he wanted to kill him, why didn't he do it there? Why did he wait until Trayvon had the advantage in the dark, where there are plenty of witnesses looking out their windows, people just feet away? Why would he do it? Why would he lay there on the ground crying for help? And when he sees somebody, he's assuming now there are people that know that he's in trouble, and he's yelling out. Why would he do it then? Why would he? That's crazy. Of course he was in fear for his life. And now they're telling us, well, he was unarmed and he was not committing a crime. And how was George supposed to know that? There's just no way. It would be impossible for him to know that. All he knows when he came up is Trayvon is in a position where he could be committing a crime, or he's about to commit a crime. And he has the right under citizens arrest laws. Under common law, every citizen of the United States has the right of citizen's arrest. Now, George hadn't seen him commit a crime, but when he sees him in a suspicious way, moving between houses where he shouldn't be, it's not only his right, but it's his duty as an American to monitor him and to call the police and to do everything he can to make sure that the neighborhood's safe. But Corey wants us to believe that somehow or another George knew that Trayvon was unarmed and was not committing a crime, but he was just like profiling him. Profiling him in what way? Well, they couldn't explain that because the guy Gilbreth couldn't tell us what it meant because he said the other guy talked about it. What does it mean? Was it racially profiled? Well, they couldn't say. No, I couldn't tell you that. No, I don't think it was racially profiling, just sort of like profiling in the sense that, well, there were people in that neighborhood that were dressed kind of like him and they happened to be black, were breaking into the neighborhood houses. He would be on the lookout for people that looked like the criminals who had been breaking in. But why would they put that in the affidavit if that's acceptable? I mean, wouldn't that's what the cops would be doing too, right? They would be like looking for, they wouldn't stop, you know, Granny. They're going to try to look to people that fit the profile, the kind of people that have been committing crimes in that area. And if you see a guy slinking around through the neighborhood, you're going to, stop him and take a look. So the next paragraph says that, Zimmerman lives there, and he assumed Trayvon was a criminal, but he didn't. He never said that. He never made that assumption. The fact that Trayvon took off running made him think so, or at least, most people think, he must be a criminal. He's running off because he's obviously not afraid of me. Get right up in my face around my car. He's not afraid that I might come out. And now they're saying that George said that he was acting suspicious. Well, that's what he was doing. But they don't say what it was. They just say that he was asking for a police officer because he perceived that Martin was acting suspicious. Perceived, which, most people take as sounding like, it was almost like that's what he was seeing. No one else would see that. Why didn't they just say he asked for an officer because he saw Martin going between houses, or he saw Martin in a way that made him look suspicious because he's not really walking through, just a little clip of what George said, what he really said. It's easy to do. All you have to do is go to the recording and clip the words. So the next paragraph is these people suggesting that George made rude comments that would lead a normal person to believe that he might want to kill somebody. So they quote him, and he says, "These assholes, they always get away." Does that sound to you like he's so angry and upset that he wants to kill somebody? I don't think so. And then he said, "These fucking punks." Big deal. Big deal. I've said a lot worse, and I certainly was not thinking about hurting anybody. If that's all they could find about what he said, that's just amazing because, I think I would have been a little more specific. They come into the neighborhood through a corner, sneak in, and they break into houses, and then whoosh, they slide out between houses and they're gone. And it's very irritating when you see this happen over and over and over again, and all these people are losing their stuff. And guess who that cost? And everybody's like, "Oh, well, he's got insurance, that'll pay for it." Well, guess what happens to your insurance costs when they have to pay out claims like that? It's coming out of your pocket. It's coming out of my pocket. Everybody that pays for insurance, homeowners insurance or renter's insurance or anything like that, you're paying for it. Anybody that's paying for theft insurance. And it can be very expensive. So don't think that you're getting, it doesn't cost you anything when these guys are going around robbing people. So now the next paragraph, they're talking about Dee Dee, or whoever it is, his supposed friend that's on the other line, and she's saying that he's afraid, he's scared of George. But we know that's not true, or he wouldn't have confronted George in the parking lot, first of all, over there when George is sitting in his car talking to the dispatcher, or the second time when he came back to greet George near the T of the sidewalk, and he had left that area when George was on the dispatch. He was talking to the dispatcher, and he sees Trayvon run around that corner and run south down that sidewalk. George is talking to the dispatcher as he's getting out of his car, so we hear him get out of his car. We hear the ding of the car bell, and then he says, which way is the guy running? And George said he's running towards the back entrance, which is south down that run between the houses, between the buildings. But they're not including any of George's information or any of the evidence that's proven evidence, not just George's opinions or statements, but the statements of the witnesses that helped George. Any of that. They just leave all of that out. There is nothing in here. Why don't they put in here the statement by John, the guy that made the statement on the news, stating that he saw Trayvon sitting on top of George, pounding on him, and George was trying to lean up to see him and yelling, "Help, help." Wouldn't that be important to the judge, don't you think? I would think that the judge would like to hear that, and that's part of the truth. At the very minimum, it's what John saw at the time, and that's what they had as evidence at the time. Why couldn't they have presented that also? That would have not only been fair, but the responsible thing to do. They have a duty to the state to seek justice, not a conviction. And if they get a conviction that is not just, then they have committed a crime. Lying to the judge in order to move this case forward in a direction of a conviction, when they know there is a reason why the judge would throw it out right now if they provided that information, is cause for somebody to, at the very minimum, lose their job. If they would have told the story as the evidence lays it out, as the evidence that we have it, if they just laid it out in a 2-page point-by-point statement, going through the actual evidence, listing the statements of witnesses as small as they need to be, the judge would have said, well, this is definitely a stand your ground case or a immunity case. Thank you for providing that, prosecution, and we'll dismiss that today. Instead, they had to provide this because they knew the judge had no access to any of the information in this case. The judge doesn't go online and dig through all of the evidence like we do. So now they say Zimmerman got out of his vehicle and followed Martin. When the police dispatcher realized Martin was pursuing him, and remember that happened, you could hear George, you could hear the wind out there, and George was walking fast. Somebody recently had posted a video that showed somebody walking, and you can hear him breathing hard because of the walking. So, I've come to the conclusion that noise can be made by walking fast. So George was moving in the direction where he last saw Trayvon. And this is what that should have been said. If they were going to speak to the judge about it and tell him what happened, they need to tell him what happened. George gets out of the car. Trayvon's running south down that walkway between the houses, and he can't see them anymore. He's lost sight of Trayvon. But the judge isn't going to find that out. He's not going to see that information. But that's part of the evidence of this case. And it doesn't have to be drawn out, but it's the short fact. So what they should have done was said, the dispatcher said, "We don't need you to do that," and they could have even quoted him, and then they could have quoted George as saying, "Okay." And then about 10 seconds later, the sound of the wind goes away. Maybe 15 seconds, I don't know. But they can say that all in a very short sentence. But they didn't. They just went ahead and said that George disregarded the dispatcher's statement that we don't need you to do that. They lie. They lie about what the dispatcher said. He said he instructed Zimmerman not to do that, and that the responding officer would meet him. That's not what happened. Not at all. That's not even close to what happened. He said, "We don't need you to do that." And then George said, "Okay." Where's this evidence that he says that George disregarded the police dispatcher? Where's the evidence for that? So that's a lie. That right there is a lie. And then they said that he continued following Trayvon as he was trying to return to his home. No, because Trayvon was going south. George never went south down that runway. And we know that whatever happened with Trayvon, he ended up 4 minutes later back at the same place, because where his dead body was found was just feet away from that T where he turned that corner. And it would have taken him less than 3 seconds to pass that area when he was running around that corner. 1 second probably, because he's just right there. It's right around the corner of the T. So it's either a lie or at the very least a misrepresentation of the evidence. The next paragraph, it said that Zimmerman confronted Martin. Where's the evidence of that? Shouldn't they be required to give some sort of evidence where, Zimmerman confronted Martin and a struggle ensued. That is probably the worst sentence in this whole thing. It's just a straight out lie. There is no evidence of that. The evidence suggests that Martin came and confronted George. George was up there by the T. Trayvon had run south towards where his family's house was and had more than enough time to go all the way down there, spend some time down there, and then come back. And in fact, his dad's girlfriend says that she sees him down there, or at least the way that she states it, that he went to the store, then he's coming back, then he's on the patio, and then now he's gone. So the layout, it pretty much tells us that she saw him there. So I think we pretty much figured that out, that he decided to go back and give George a beat down. If he would have just stopped at some point while George was yelling and said, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave, that would have been the end of it. He might have even slapped George's face and said, "Let this be a lesson to you. Don't be following me." But he wouldn't quit and he wouldn't get off. So that statement from the in this affidavit, this sworn statement, is a lie. Zimmerman did not confront Martin. And the facts are the struggle didn't ensue. What happened is Trayvon punched George in the nose, and that's what should have been said. Should have said, Martin came back to the T and confronted George and asked him, "Why are you following me?" According to Dee Dee, it was, "Why are you following me?" And George said, "You got a problem," or whatever. George was reminding him or trying to remember what he said. It was something like, "You got a problem," or something like that. Then they say that witnesses hear arguing. It sounds like struggling. Well, maybe they ought to tell the judge what witness 11 said, that she lives right there on the corner and that she heard the argument right there at that corner and move around towards just exactly the way George said it. So everything she said corroborated George, and she's right there. She's one of the first witnesses that can hear it. And she lives right next door to John. And John hears it, and he comes out and sees it. Why are we not apprised of that? Why don't they tell the judge here in this affidavit that Trayvon was seen on top of George? Then they say Trayvon's mother reviews the 911 call and identifies the voice as Trayvon's, but they don't tell us that George's father and his family all say the same thing. And they also don't tell us that Trayvon's father disagrees with the mother, that he doesn't hear Trayvon's voice, at least initially, until his father had a little chat with the attorney Crump. Then it says that Zimmerman shot Martin in the chest. It doesn't tell you that Zimmerman was on the ground laying on his back while Trayvon was on him, mounted him, and was pounding him, as the witnesses all agree. So, as far as I'm concerned, if you say Zimmerman shot Martin in the chest, it's the truth, but it's a half-truth, because you're not telling the rest of the story. Where in this story does it say that George claimed that he was defending his life? So then they say that when the police arrive, George admits shooting Trayvon. But they don't say the rest of the story. They don't say in self-defense. He doesn't, when police arrive, Zimmerman admitted shooting Martin. What? So what are they saying in this story? That when the police came, George just said, "Yep, I shot him. It was me. I did it. I did it." So without that knowledge, the judge can't just hand over the immunity. See, it's required. If you want immunity, then you have to claim it. You have to say at the time that it was self-defense. You can't say it a week later or 2 weeks later and go, "Well, now that I think about it, it was self-defense." No, you can't do that. Once you've got to do it right away. So if the judge doesn't know that was said at that very moment, then how can he say, "Wait a minute, this is an immunity case"? The judge needs that information, but the prosecutor's denying the judge that information. And we, the people of Florida, pay the prosecutor to provide the judge with all that information. A good prosecutor doesn't win cases. A good prosecutor assures justice in every case. But all they say is, when police arrive, Zimmerman admits shooting him. Come on, that's ridiculous. Officers recover the gun from his holster inside his waistband. Yeah, because he said, "I've got the gun. I've got a gun." They don't say that in this. Hey, Zimmerman admitted shooting Martin because of self-defense. Then the officers recovered a gun when George told them that he had the gun, when he advised them that he had a gun. Then they say, "Well, we found a casing." Of course there was a casing. He used the gun to defend his life, but the judge is not going to find that information in this document. Nowhere in this document will you find any information about George suggesting he's defending his life here, because they can't put that in there. If they do, the case is closed, because all the evidence points to self-defense. So their next sentence is, the medical examiner performs an autopsy and determined that Martin died from a gunshot wound. This is really fantastic information, and this is really what the judge needs to know. The kid gets shot in the chest somewhere near the heart, and he's dead now. Make sure you tell the judge that he died from a gunshot wound. That would be part of the affidavit. Yeah, very helpful. Don't you think it'd be also helpful to tell the judge that George was claiming self-defense? Maybe. So the last paragraph, they're trying to make it as if that, well, we can do all this and omit all the exculpatory evidence, all the information that is necessary to come to a proper conclusion in this case. Just the basic facts. We're going to protect ourselves by saying, we may not have included everything, but they say, well, it's not complete and it's not pertinent, but it's just so that we can determine probable cause for second-degree murder. I'm like, well, where is the probable cause for second-degree murder? For second-degree murder, you need a depraved mind, so somewhere in there should be something about depravity. And I'm guessing the only thing that they're pointing to for that, maybe that's why they use the cuss words. These assholes, they always get away, and these fucking punks, as if that is, that's it. I mean, where is the crime? Where's the crime? Well, I guess the judge is going to look at it and say, well, this is obvious. The crime is that Zimmerman shot Martin in the chest. Wait a minute. Here's the crime. Zimmerman confronted Martin and a struggle ensued. So Zimmerman started a fight. People heard the sound of the fight. And George shoots Trayvon in the chest. That's what the judge hears. So we don't have any evidence that George ever confronted Trayvon. In fact, all the evidence points the other direction. And that George shot Trayvon. So that's all he's got. He doesn't have anything else. And that Trayvon's dead. So we've got George starting a fight, shooting Trayvon. Trayvon's dead. That's just tons of information. And the way that they try to wash their hands of it is to say there's more facts. Well, yeah, but you've lied about these facts, and then you left out all the pertinent information. All says, well, we didn't, it's not a complete recitation of the pertinent facts. It's not a recitation of any facts. Where are the facts in this case? Where are the facts? Don't we need the facts? The fact that George was on the ground getting beat up, wouldn't that be helpful? We've got pictures of his head, bloodied, broken nose. None of that's helpful to this case? Sure. Or do we expect the judge to have to ask for all that information? Or shouldn't that be presented in the affidavit? Just the basic facts. It's criminal if you ask me. And as far as I'm concerned, she definitely needs to face some sort of charges for this kind of affidavit, sworn document. Anyway, good talking to you guys. Talk to you later. Bye.